Welcome to the Business as Mission podcast, dedicated to those who long to see God glorified in business and the nations reached for Christ. Your host is Mike Bayer, longtime BAM leader and founder of Third Path Initiative, an online education resource for starting and growing BAM businesses around the world.
Welcome back to another episode of the Business as Mission podcast. We have the first three-peat, the first hat trick of our guests. We call him Dr. Rod. He's an old friend of mine and an old friend of BAM, based near the Gold Coast of Australia, college professor, economist by training, pastor by calling, and his particular passion is BAM and being a pastor, a real pastor to business people in the marketplace. So Rod, first of all, welcome back. Great to see you, always.
Thank you for having me, Mike. It's just great to be with you again.
So we were just talking, and we'll pick this up. Maybe, I know we won't go back and rehash stuff we've talked about in the past. If anybody wants to hear more, they can find the episodes with Dr. Rod in it. But we were just talking about something, and we both kind of lit up over it. I'd mentioned that I was speaking in Holland at the Netherlands Business as Mission Congress and had spent the whole time just digging into Genesis 1 and 2 and finding BAM there and I had, you know me, and I'm probably a lot like you. I had another 2 hours worth of stuff piling up because I just kept digging and God kept turning the light on and we kept going on and on into Genesis 1 and 2, and you just begin to see so many amazing things. And I want to talk about that, but I also want to go to kind of where we ended our pre-recording conversation with looking forward and realizing that while business and work was pre-fall, obviously, it was in the garden, it was part of God's original perfect plan, and it will also be when the end of time comes and the kingdom is fully established, fully manifested. Some people will call it heaven, whatever you want to call it. We'll still be working. We were working before the fall, we worked after the fall, and then when all of the impact and presence of sin is once and for all done away with, we'll still be working. And we kind of, both of us lit up. Rod, what do you think about that? I know you agree, but talk about that a little bit.
Well, I do. I do agree. And I think the only difference will be that in eternity, we just won't be able to tell the difference between work, play, and worship.
Yeah.
You know, it will all bring us the same level of joy, as it were. And I always believe that God intended our work to bring us joy. But of course, the way in which work is often designed today doesn't actually really bring people joy. So I think that there's lots we can do in this life to reflect a lot more of heaven in the workplace. You know, I just love talking with business people about the potential of their business to more fully embrace the idea of heaven on earth. And, you know, one of the ways in which we can do that is to look at how we've designed the work that our people do to do the very best we can to give them opportunities to discover, deploy, and develop their creative capacities, to build relationship, because these days, for many people, their best community is in their workplace.
Oh, for sure.
And that's a feature of modern living, I think. And, of course, also people find purpose in their work, or they should. So we need to engage people as much as we can in the central purpose of our business, whatever God has called us to. But the other thing, too, is being in the workplace just gives people to develop as moral beings. And I define a moral being as simply as someone who has the capacity to make choices. And ethics determines whether or not their choices are good choices. Mm-hmm. But we get to exercise our capacity to make choices in the workplace all the time. And I actually think we can design work to incorporate all of those aspects of our imageness in God. And I just love talking with business people about that. And I was sitting at a dinner table just last night, actually. It was at a fundraiser, and of course they invite business people to fundraisers. And I was just talking about how business can go well beyond merely providing funding for kingdom activities and actually design their own workplace to much more fully reflect heaven on earth. And they were just enthralled because no one had ever presented it to them. And of course, they're so busy in business They don't do what I do. They don't sit around for days on end and ponder what the Bible has to say about business.
Gosh, Rod, there's so many places we could go with this. My mind is popping with different directions, but I want to, I guess, throw in this, and then I want to come back to what you just said. The modern business as mission movement, and I distinguish it from just business as mission, because business as mission goes all the way back, literally to the very beginning. It's as biblical as the day of creation. It's as biblical as working in the garden and so forth. But the modern movement, which began to formulate in the 90s and became much more coalescent in the 2000s, really started back, or really revived itself as a means, as a strategy to take the gospel to unreached people groups, which I still, like you, maintain that as a core passion of my personal missiology. But the other thing that's, call it backwash blessing of this, is, and this has happened. People have gone literally all over the world with business to the hard to get to places, the hard to live in places, and they've established gospel centers and churches and disciples, and it's been beautiful. But to me, one of the amazing blowback blessings is what you just touched on, that more and more business people, and a few more pastors, maybe more than the last time we talked, still a minority, have begun to think and talk about the kingdom in business, not just the kingdom through business. What you were just talking about is, I love the phrase, how do we design work as believers, as leaders, as business owners? How do we design work so that it enables the expression of the different kingdom values? Have you written on that yet? If you haven't, will you?
Well, we touched on it in a paper for BAM Global that we wrote back in 2013. When I say we, it was a team of people, and I can remember staying up late at night and drawing diagrams on the back of table napkins, and there were a couple of people who were really quite instrumental in putting those ideas on paper. So I guess you could say I was the editor of that paper. That one was titled, "Your Kingdom Come, Your Will Be Done in Business." And, I see business as the answer to our prayer, "Give us this day our daily bread." And when you think about it, when we slice a piece of bread to put in the toaster for breakfast in the morning, there's been a farm enterprise, maybe a family company or a big publicly listed company that has actually produced the cereal that was used for that bread. And then there are businesses involved in processing the grain, in transporting the grain. Then there's a business that actually takes the grain and other inputs and transforms it into a loaf of bread. And that just fills me with wonder. Absolutely fills me with wonder. And everywhere there are businesses involved. And I believe God created business. It was God's idea. It was God's magnificent idea to contribute to human flourishing. And every business does that. Every business is making a positive contribution to human flourishing.
Even though they don't realize it. Many have no idea that God is using them.
They have no idea. A farmer worries about the weather and perhaps doesn't consider how important every day is. Every one of his or her days is important to somebody. And, one of the great things about technology these days, of course, with blockchain technology, which, of course, underlies cryptocurrencies, it also means that if I'm wearing, a woolen, do you call them pullovers in America? We call them jumpers here.
Yeah, we call them pullovers. I
pullover?
Jumpers
pullover,
are something kids wear.
Well, a jumper is also a young sheep that can jump a fence. But, with blockchain technology, if I buy a high-end woolen jumper, I can actually trace that wool right back to the very farm that it came from. I think that's marvelous because it does help us understand how critically important every business is, small, medium, and large, in actually producing what we use every day. And business is just so critical, and we take it for granted. And use and abuse business roundly. We abuse business in political processes. And sometimes I think we forget when we pray that that prayer, give us this day our daily bread. We say the words, but we don't really meditate on what it all means.
Tim Keller wrote a lot about that, right?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
And Every Good Endeavor and some of his
Every Good Endeavor.
Yeah.
Marvelous. Absolutely.
So you're talking there, and I love the fact of reintroducing people to God's invisible hand in what we call supply chain. You know, we tend to make it an atheistic, mechanical thing, and we miss the start and the middle and the end of it is God. And it is his means, right, of providing not just food, not just bread, but everything we need for life. And so we have that, and I love, to me, that answers one of the great general questions about business and employment is like, why am I doing this? You know, why does this matter? You know, a paycheck isn't enough. I mean, you got to be paid, but it's not enough. So the idea of bringing people to begin to recognize the divine purpose in their business, in their industry, you know, this is their day-to-day work. So that's part of, I think, painting the picture of a godly design. But what other things would you want to see from your thinking about God's design for work that we either miss altogether or that we're putting in a kind of pitiful attempt at?
Well, look, I think the most important thing, certainly for Christians, is to bear in mind that what we're doing is for the glory of God, the encouragement of the saints, and the salvation of the lost. In fact, I remind myself of that often enough if I'm starting to get a little bit worn out, as I do towards the end of the year, that what I do is for his glory, for the encouragement of the saints, and for the salvation of the lost. And I actually think that is one of the very few things in the Bible which is hierarchical. Most things are not, but I think there's evidence in the Bible that we're to look after our sisters and brothers in Christ before we actually go into the rest of the world. But that's critical in all human activity. But I think the genius of business is the creativity side of it. And, I just marvel when I sit down and talk with an entrepreneur, Mike, because I'm not. My gifting is in teaching and pastoring. I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not a risk taker. Not many economists are risk takers. we write about it, we talk about it, but we don't take risk ourselves. I think that's why we end up in universities. So I think that's critically important, that we see business as a very important, not so much outlet, but a repository of creativity. And entrepreneurs are intensely creative people, and sometimes they need a good manager.
Yeah,
because not all entrepreneurs are good managers.
They need an implementer that can turn their dreams into action. Yeah.
And look, I think another key, Mike, is don't fall into the trap of believing it's a kind of one-size-fits-all thing. And we need to do our best to figure out what is God's specific purpose for our business. So, look, in some circumstances, that purpose might well be to provide employment and training opportunities for people in a low socioeconomic area. And my church is located in such an area. There are a lot of recent migrants there, and under Australian law, recent migrants don't qualify for any kind of government assistance. So if they can't find a job, they haven't got any government assistance to fall back on. Now, why wouldn't God call someone to establish a business in an area like that, primarily to provide job opportunities and training opportunities for recent migrants, for example, who can't access unemployment benefits or any of those kinds of things? They can't access free medical care and so on. But there may be another business whose primary purpose is to make a gigantic profit and to use that profit to underwrite some endeavour elsewhere in the kingdom. So not all businesses are going to be as profitable as every other business, because there's a specific gifting or calling upon some entrepreneurs simply to make a lot of money, but then to use it for God's purposes. Look, I've met people whose primary call really is to develop technologies which enable us to manage the interaction between business and the natural environment better, because God cares about all of his creation. So it doesn't surprise me that some business have a specific calling, for example, to develop new technologies which enable us to maintain our level of living without doing irreparable damage to the environment.
Yeah.
Look, in other cases, a business might be strongly people-oriented. I know an entrepreneur up in Brisbane, not too far from where I live. He runs a business where they break down computers and pull out all of the recyclable elements. He employs only people who have disabilities. Now, his calling is to provide employment for these people for whom there are really no other employment opportunities. Now, all of these businesses are different. They have a different perspective, but they're all operating within that kingdom parameter or that kingdom model. And I think for people in business, you've got too small a view of business if you think business is about making a profit and then using that profit to support the local church. That is part of it. Look, I encourage every Christian in business, be they a business owner, a manager, or an employee, be engaged in your local church, because you need the spiritual covering of that church to be in business, but also think more broadly than merely providing tithes or offerings to the local church. Expand your business, grow your business to the point where you have resources available to support other kingdom initiatives, but also be sensitive to the specific assignment that God has given you in business. And I would expect that some businesses are far more profitable than others because they don't all have the same assignment or specific purpose given by God.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with my granddaughter last night. She was her 9th birthday, and we were talking about the things she's good at, her particular gifting and so forth. We were looking at 1 Corinthians 12, and where the principle is the variety of gifts, now not all the same, but one Spirit, right? And so there's that diversity and unity, and that's really what you've just described. Is that the underlying unifying purposes of business are the same for all of us: glorify God, bless the local fellowship, and it reach the lost, right? I mean, that's a universal. Nobody can opt out of those. But then this individual, and I've begun to use the term assignment to differentiate from call, right? I'm called to business, but what's my assignment? Yeah. And so as you're saying that, and again, my mind's popping with questions for you. This may be the longest podcast in history. But I'm thinking, okay, you with a pastor's heart, a pastoral gifting, teacher, business training, economist. I mean, you got all these tools, and you have such a passion and a heart for your business people. You are one of the few pastors I know in the world, literally, that you get it. You don't have it all. No one has it all, but you get it, and you're doing it. But my question is that how do you help in a pastoral way? You're talking to a group of business people. Let's say you're sitting around the dinner table at the fundraiser, and you guys are talking about business and God's purpose for it. You get into the idea of calling or assignment or whatever word, and one of the guys at the table says, "Rod, how do I discover that? I'm getting what you're saying. I want what you're saying. How do I figure out what my particular assignment is? How did the guy that employs only handicapped people, right, disabled people, where did he get that?" Now, we know the answer, but how do you get people to engage in that search and hear the word of the Lord?
Look, I think that's pretty tough. I really do. I have a friend who uses the expression, God's will, God's way. And I was talking with another friend of mine the other day, and we started thinking, no, it actually starts with God's way rather than God's will. So you need to start living your life according to what you know. So we know how to live life in generally from the Word of God. So the first thing we need to do is to make sure we're spending a lot of time in the Word of God. But I think one of the ways in which we can come to an understanding of that specific assignment is to just reflect back over your life and see if you can pinpoint some of the major milestones in life. Now, for me, I can go back to about age 12 when I had my first experience in a public speaking environment. And I can look at all of these little guideposts or signposts, if you like, that lead me to believe my calling is to do with teaching. I love reading, I love writing, I love preparing a lecture, I love delivering a lecture, I love talking about it after class. Same thing in the context of the church. I love preparing. I love I'm not really a preacher, I'm a teacher rather than a preacher. But there's one thing I love to sit down and talk with people after church and just talk about what I presented. And even listen to counter arguments, people who have a different viewpoint to me. So I know it's teaching. And then you use that term assignment, and I think you're right that we've got a primary call, which, as Os Guinness says, that's the call by the caller, God, and that's universal. Then there's that vocational calling, which may be engineering, or in my case, teaching. In other people's case, it might be entrepreneurship. That's their general gifting that will become apparent over time. Usually I think there's an inkling by the time a child is about the age of your granddaughter, Mike. You can often pick up the entrepreneurial gifting at that age because they'll be, they'll want chickens in the backyard so they can sell eggs to the neighbour or something like that.
Yeah.
That does, becomes apparent fairly early. Then I think you need to be living your life God's way, and God's will gradually unfold. And you might try a few things first before you find the right fit. My advice to people is don't fret. I've been particularly blessed because I've had a thoroughly satisfying career. I've loved every day. Well, there's a few days I haven't loved, but I've loved almost every day of my career as an academic, as a pastor, as a company director, mingling with people, talking about business God's way. And I think it's something that becomes apparent and unfolds for you over a period of time. My advice to people is don't fret. Don't fret about it. The most important thing is to live your life God's way. And I think that if you're living life God's way, God's will for you, his specific will for you, simply becomes apparent. Look, you can huff and puff in prayer, and clearly you do need some prayerful consideration. But it is, I think, something that God reveals to you, generally speaking, gradually, over a period of time. And I know when I've had to make big decisions, these are decisions about maybe resigning from one job and going to another. My wife and I have tended to pray. Not tended, that's our rule for living, really. And, I shared with you a little earlier, Mike, that like you, I gave up full-time paid employment in 2020. That was after my wife and I prayed. I began to have this sense that it was time for a shift. I was experiencing a growing desire to do the pastoring thing better than I had done in the past. I wanted to spend more time on BAM and some other areas of business. So my wife and I just prayed for a weekend. The scary bit, of course, comes at the end of the weekend when you come together after you've prayed to share what you believe God has shown you. Mm-hmm. And, of course, my wife usually wants me to go first. And I remember that weekend I said, I feel God is saying it's time for me to trust him for my income and to give up full-time paid employment. And she said, that's the same thing I've got.
Wow.
And and we've done that on numerous occasions, and God has always spoken to us in the same way. So I just encourage people, take time for reflection over the history, if you like, of your life, and just see if you can identify those points which might be showing you something about the vocational calling, and then work with God, like in a relaxed way. Take your time. It may be that there's a change in employment or a change in geographical location, and I think God's specific will for you in terms of your vocation will unfold. It will be revealed, often gradually. And that's probably the best answer I can give. I don't think there's necessarily a formula. You know, you can't go away and pray for 90 days, go up on a mountain and fast for 40 days, and you can't cajole God into revealing it, but I think it is something that happens as a process. It's a bit like holiness, Mike. It's a process.
We'll be right back after a short break.
I love, as you're explaining that, the thing that, there was so many things stand out, but the one thing that really stands out is don't fret it. Don't let it get you twisted up in a knot, because then you won't be able to hear anything. And the opposite of that is to release the situation to God in faith, to really trust Him and to believe that He has a plan for you. Yeah. The other thing I want to ask you, and I don't want this whole podcast to be about the will of God, but it's kind of going that way, and that's fine with me. I have many, particularly young people, and I know you do too, coming out of a college setting, that want us to guide them, that want us to give them advice on how to discover God's particular plan for them. And there is no formula. I support that 1,000%. There's no formula. It is a process. God is faithful. God will get you there. I look at my life, same as yours, like it was kind of always apparent. You know, when I tried to figure it out, I got tense and stressed and worried and unhappy. And God would always say, just back off a little bit, take a deep breath, trust me, and I'll make it clear. And he literally always has. For 50 years, He's always made that clear to me. But this is something I hear or I sense when I'm talking, particularly to young people. There's this fear that if they miss a turn on the road, the game is over. How do you, because people don't say that necessarily, some do, but it's there. What do we say to them? How do we help them?
Well, I think the first thing to say is it's not a sin if you're not right in the middle of your assignment today. It isn't about sin, it's more about fulfilling your destiny. So taking a wrong turn isn't really going to be a problem for God.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important to establish. That's why it's more important to live God's way. We've got to live God's way. And we know how to do that because the Word of God makes it pretty clear how to live a flourishing life. And also, if you make a mistake, if you take a wrong turn, it doesn't mess God's plan up for the whole of eternity and for the whole of the universe. You know, God can cope with that. If you like, He's got plenty of plan Bs. There's no issue there. So it's not so much about if you miss it, that somehow something will go wrong in God's grand plan for human history. It's more about fulfilling your own destiny. It's becoming what I call a fully fulfilled Christian. So don't fret about it. I've come across people even older than I am who feel that their whole career has been wrong, or it's been ineffective, or it's had no impact. Look, what I say to them is, don't worry about the past, because God isn't a God of the past. He's a God of the future. So let's talk about now, and let's talk about tomorrow. And it's never too late to start. So my encouragement to people would be, one, if you have taken a wrong turn, or if you feel you're not really in your assignment, it's not a sin at all. It's more about fulfilling your destiny. And along the way, you will bless people. And even if you are in the wrong assignment, you can rest assured that if you're doing it God's way, you're blessing people anyway. But it saddens me really when I realize that most people can't say what I say and what you say about our experience over the last 50 years. I count it a great blessing, but I do think that, neither you nor I are special in that sense. It is available to everybody, but it's not something you can do by huffing and puffing. Get in an easy rhythm with God. Look, Mike, you talked a little earlier about not getting past Genesis 1 and 2 when you were in the Netherlands and teaching on BAM. It's a bit of a pity you didn't get to Genesis chapter 3 because, most of us focus on, original sin. We build this doctrine of original sin from Genesis chapter 3. But I think there's something really significant in Genesis chapter 3, and it is the fact that it seems that God was in the habit walking in the garden in the cool of the evening and simply conversing with Adam and Eve. And I think that's what prayer is all about. You know, where if when you pray, if you can think of it like that, picture yourself having a conversation with God. In my imagination, you know, before the fall, after their day of work in the garden, tending and keeping the garden, Adam and Eve they had questions for God.
Yeah.
And he was there. He was literally with them every day. And to me, that's what prayer's all about, Mike. And if your question is, well, what's my assignment? Ask him.
Yeah.
When you're metaphorically walking in the garden in the cool of the evening and simply having a conversation with God.
No, I love that. And that is one of my favorite images from Genesis, is the Adam and God walking with Adam in the cool of the day. You know, you got to get the sense that the sun, you know, you say work is over, the sun is setting a little bit. It's just a perfect idyllic situation. And they're literally, I mean, I think it's literal, by the way. I don't think that's just figurative.
Oh, so do I. Yes, I do.
I think
absolutely.
They were literally walking together in the garden.
Wow.
And whether or not that was the pre-incarnate Christ, I don't know. But think about just this beautiful experience. And then imagine Adam saying to the perfect father, hey, Father, what do you want me to do? And that father turns and says, you figure it out. Right? I mean, it's not going to happen. No father, much less the perfect father, handle it like that.
That's what I often say to people, Mike, look, if it was meant to be that way, God would have said to Adam and Eve, you sit on a log and watch me work.
Yeah.
But he didn't say that.
Yeah.
He said, tend and keep the garden. And in the Hebrew, that has connotations of actually, you know, developing the garden. So I think what was on God's heart was that the garden would grow to spread and cover the whole earth, and incidentally fill the earth with people like him, not just made in his image, but behaving in his image as well. Now that was lost with the fall, of course, but I believe that the Great Commission that we read there in Matthew 28 is the analogue of Genesis chapter 3. And God's heart has never changed. He's wanted the earth to be filled with people like him. Like all human beings, of course, are made in his image, but it's only those who have become Christ followers who, as it were, live and behave or outwork that image as God intended right back in the beginning. So part of the role of BAM businesses, of course, is to fulfill that original intention in the Garden of Eden.
It's interesting, as we're going through this, I'm thinking about the tendency to put all the emphasis on the church, and obviously the big C church is the bride of Christ, the body of Christ, and it matters intensely. But you mentioned something earlier that I think doesn't lower the meaning of church, doesn't lower the value of church, but it raises the value of the community that we find in business. Because the reality is we spend the majority of our waking life at work, whatever that is. We're not at church. We are the church at work, but we're not in the Sunday building. We're not with our family, sadly, but we're not. We are working. And so to think about community, and particularly a thriving spiritual community at work, really makes an enormous amount of sense. Because and I'll pitch this to you, I'd love you to kind of run with it or throw it to the ground, whatever you think it's worthy of. But I get this image of, okay, if Adam and Eve had not fallen when they did, or had not fallen and began to reproduce in their own kind, they would have had a community, yes, it would have been family, but it would have been a community of workers. And can you just, again, imagination, but can you imagine what that community would have been like? And I get this sense that this is part of what God's doing in the business world. He is, just like the body of Christ we are the redeemed, but not just in the building, right? We are the redeemed in the office building and in the factory. And so in that setting, beginning to see this wonderful kingdom community in action. Am I nuts?
No, you're not. You're not. And look, I've been seeing my role as pastor in a different light in the last couple of years as as the theology of work and worship has developed. I know you've done at least one interview with Cara Martin.
Yeah, a couple of them.
It was just enthralling. She's done a lot of really good work.
Absolutely.
And I mean, her books, I think there's a third due out soon in her series on workship. So I often now say to my own congregation, mine's a very small church, but we say, really the difference between you and me is that I've actually got a little plastic card with a number on it that makes it legal for me to marry people. Okay? Now, there's absolutely no other difference between the people in my congregation and me.
Well, you probably also get to park in the restricted parking areas at the hospital.
True enough. We used to have a worship leaders car park. That was the only designated car park we had. But so really, my church is full of pastors. God brings us together on Sunday mornings so we can be built up, encouraged, equipped to do what God has called us to do. And I no longer use the term church scattered, and I'm very grateful to some friends of mine who have taught me to improve my language. I don't even think about the church isn't scattered. The church is strategically located in the marketplace.
Great word.
That's on God's part. So when I have my people with me on a Sunday, my role, I think, as pastor is to encourage them, to equip them to do what God has called them to do out there in the marketplace. Now, for some, their ministry will be within their family, their household, perhaps within their local community, within their neighborhood. For others, it will be literally in the marketplace because they will be in paid employment or they might even own a business. But if we start, each one of us, just to think, I know people can't see my hands. I tend to use my hands to
He's doing the exploding head thing, okay?
But we start to think of ourselves as being called by God as ministers and strategically placed somewhere in the marketplace. And for many of us, of course, we're both in the family and in the literal marketplace. Some of us may be involved in voluntary work, say in a local sporting club or something like that, but we're all in ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And every interaction we have is as an ambassador of Jesus Christ. So I agree 120% with what you've said, Mike. And look, if there are pastors listening, my encouragement to them is to see your congregation made up of other ministers. Now, their specific call, if you like, their assignment is different to yours as a pastor, but they are ministers of the gospel nevertheless. And if they can begin to understand God has strategically placed me, He hasn't just scattered us. We don't just open the door after church on Sunday and say, go off into the world. But think about what has God placed me in and what's my specific assignment there. And I think it just makes a difference to the dynamics of church.
Whoever challenged you on the language, I think, is brilliant, because I know I've used that same term, scattered, and I stand corrected because I love the way that you're expressing it. And it all ties together with what we've been talking about. You got, if God is strategically placing me, then obviously the next question would be why? What is it you have me to do? And so now I'm beginning to seek out the way and the will of God. And then you come back to the church, where the pastor's role is not to teach me how to do sock puppets in Vacation Bible School, but how to be faithful, how to walk in God's way where He has strategically placed me. This is a beautiful pattern coming together for me, and I love that you took us there. So, all right, we're going to, as usual, run out of time before we run out of talk. Let me ask you, for the folks who know you, and I know in Australia many people know you, but many people in the U.S. know you through a variety of ways. BAM Global, you've been a big part of that. You've taught and so forth. People have heard you in the podcast and other programs. What's next for Dr. Rod?
Well, believe it or not, I feel God has been speaking to me. you've challenged me, I think, a couple of times in the area of writing. It's coming. Right now, I'm wrestling with when is the right time to give up a lot of my activities and really concentrate on writing. I still think I'm learning, Mike. And look, I think this is our third time together on your podcast, and every time I've learned new things between our discussions. I'm still learning. I'm still sort of an apprentice, but I really do feel that probably at the end of 2026, and I should be pretty careful about saying this public, I guess, that will be time for me to pull back on a lot of my activities. I'm a director of a number of charitable companies. I chair a charity here on the Gold Coast. That's time consuming. It always is if you're serious about your role as a director. I still do a fair bit of part-time paid teaching. I'm hoping to have enough saved within the next couple of years so that I can generate my own private pension. I really do believe it will be time then to start writing. And I'm the kind of person who really needs to lock myself away for days at a time to write. I can't write in an hour here, 2 hours there. So my struggle right now, Mike, is now that I've kind of formed this sense that this is where God is taking me, I want to start now.
Yeah.
But again, this idea of being in a relaxed kind of walk with God, I feel that now is not the right time, but it's coming. I'll be 70 years of age towards the end of 2026. I hope that I will have learnt more between now and then. I'll be a wiser man, and I probably have something of more value to write by then than I do right now. So I'm just doing my best to be relaxed and doing what I preach, walk with God every day and have that conversation with him, confident that I will know when is the exact time to do this. I don't want to give up pastoring. My hope is and plan is that I will probably step down as the sort of lead pastor in my church. I still want to pastor. I want to have more time to travel. I want to have more time to write. But I love BAM. When I was introduced to BAM, I just happened to be at the same conference that Match Tunahag was at.
Mm-hmm.
He gave me a book, and I was enthralled by it. And of course, as you know, I became pretty heavily involved in BAM Global, not so much as a business practitioner, but I'm not a theologian, but I do read the Bible, and hopefully I've been able to encourage people through what I've contributed by way of writing in BAM Global, which has been a great privilege to do. And of course, I've met a lot of wonderful people doing that, and I expect I will continue to do so.
Rod, I find that incredibly encouraging and exciting to think about you writing, because you're really a gifted writer. I love the fact that you're not rushing into it, which is what I would probably do, and that you're waiting on God to tell you when and exactly how to do it. And and now I'm impatient to read what you're going to write, but in God's time, it'll be a great experience. So thank you again, Rod, my friend, my brother, and in many ways a mentor to me. Thank you for the time. Thanks for just being able to. Rod gets up at these ridiculous hours for this podcast because of the time difference between where I live and where he lives, but it's just great to see you, great to hear your thoughts, great to know what God's teaching you. As I said last time, you have to come back again. You've got to become more of a regular on the podcast because people really love to hear from you. So thank you, Rod. God bless you, brother.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, and truly it really is a privilege to do this. I absolutely love it, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and so grateful that God has brought you and me together.
Me as well. All right, my friend, I will see you whenever God says I'll see you, but looking forward to it again. That was Rod St. Hill. We call him Dr. Rod, not far from Brisbane, Australia. Dear brother, met him at Christian Heritage College, I think was where we met, back in 2011, perhaps. So it's been a journey together. Great to see you, brother.
Thank you again, Mike.
Thanks for listening to the Business as Mission podcast. We invite you to become part of the story by supporting the BAM podcast at patreon.com/BAM Stories. There's a link in the notes with this episode. For more information, go to thirdpathinitiative.com or tryventure.com. Please share this podcast and give us a review wherever you listen. The Business as Mission podcast is in partnership with TriVenture, the BAM Launchpad. TriVenture offers the 3 ingredients every entrepreneur needs to launch and scale a BAM business: courses, coaching, and capital. For more information, visit tryventure.com.